Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. So I talked a little bit associated with doing a recording on Proposition 64 with Heron in the last Stone Ape. I'm not sure what number it is. I think it's probably 154, maybe 153. My memories associated with these things are not particularly good. But anyway, we talked about Proposition 64 and Heron really wasn't interested in talking about it. I recorded a Short Funk following just to cover some of the bases, and I received some correspondence today from Lorenzo Haggerty, indicating at least he enjoyed listening to the podcast. We did get a lot of negative correspondence associated with this particular recording, though, and it was one of these surreal situations where, as a podcaster going into this thing, I'd put in probably about 5 hours, I think, worth of background reading and research. There's a lot of stuff to read. I mean, the proposition itself is like 63 plus pages, and then when you look at the kind of counter-arguments and this kind of stuff, it was just a lot of reading. And it was a lot of reading that I wanted to get right. I presented detailed notes. Heron asked for my notes. I provided him the notes. But I don't think we really did the topic any justice on Stone Ape. And what it did was ferment a certain group of listeners that have been relatively negative associated with the format and just made them be even more negative. Now, here we are, associated with a political podcast. I'm yet to record the introduction, but I'm getting notes together for that. I have the graphic. It's probably going to happen sometime within the next few days. And when that podcast is launched, it's going to be a very different mechanism in order to get listeners involved and in order, I guess, to provide more of a kind of monologue narrative in a longer format with the potential to have call-in and also interviewed guests. So in this regard, I may have a different vehicle relatively soon. And I'm also just a little bit worried that, Aaron is getting on in the years. It's a long time, a long podcast, a long format. He's having health problems. He's resolving the health problems. But I think the nature of doing a weekly recording like this, I don't know. I don't really necessarily think it's fair, perhaps, to continue this format going forward. And I think a number of the listeners are actually starting to say that explicitly, which is very curious because I would never make those kind of claims myself. But at the same point, I'm very mindful that at some stage this almost becomes like an abusive thing, right? I mean, I'm trying to get something out of a guy who just should be enjoying this period of time in his life and shouldn't be part of a podcast or any kind of dynamic thing and just do what he wants to do, but not necessarily in a environment where I'm trying to get some degree of critical discourse, for want of a better term. So it left me thinking, I mean, Heron and I are yet to talk about this explicitly, so I don't know what direction it'll take, but I need to be mindful that my role should not in any way be abusive in recording these podcasts, because ultimately I think the direction of this thing charted previously. There have been previous stops and restarts and this kind of stuff, and I don't know. I'm in two minds associated with this. I'm looking forward to talking with Heron this Friday, seeing if we can work out what actually is going on, and seeing if we can work out a direction going forward. I've invested quite a bit of time in Stone Ape over the years, and I think it's a podcast that I hoped would have a certain degree of impact, certainly on regular listeners. It seems to have that. In terms of bringing in new listeners, a lot of the correspondence that I'm receiving from listeners currently indicate even the long-term listeners are starting to get jaded with the format, and that's a real point of concern. I mean, I don't want to bring this thing on for an extended period of time if we're going to alienate a group of folk that have been listening for a few years now. It's a hard road to pick, these podcasts. You think you're just putting audio out in the general public? What's the worst that could happen? But sometimes you've got to weigh up your options, you've got to understand things. And also, I mean, with regards to Model Rail Radio, I've made some distinct changes. I've realized as a thing it needs to be in a particular format, and the listeners in general to that will be happy with the format going forward. So, what will happen with Stone Ape? Time will tell. But certainly the critical feedback, and I've been mindful to post a majority of the critical feedback, or at least instigate a majority of the critical feedback in a public domain where the listeners can participate. Primarily because I want to gauge what the listeners' meaningful experiences are wherever possible. I mean, is this one listener that posts a particularly critical thing too out there, or as has happened, have a number of listeners come forward and said, actually, these are the concerns that we have had too. We just haven't voiced them quite so eloquently. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.